Hey, what's up everybody? It's Jack Many Trades back here again with another video, and today we're going to be taking a look at this amazing camera right here, which is of course the Sony FX3. If you guys have not already seen my video going over a full review of this, I will leave it linked right up here so that we can check it out. But in this video, we're going to be doing a full setup guide, so assuming that you already have this camera or you're looking into it and seriously considering buying it, this is going to be the perfect video for you, as I'm going to go over all of the things that you will need to know to get up and running in the best way possible. So with that being said, let's get straight into it. All right, so when you get your Sony FX3, of course, you're just going to take it out of the box, and this is pretty much what you're going to get. I have a small rig cage on mine, so yours is not going to look exactly like this, but it's pretty close. On the front here, we're going to have our sensor cover. Definitely make sure that you keep this on, so that way you keep your sensor protected from dust and debris and everything else whenever you're not using a lens with it. Right up here, we have our flash and our focus illuminator, so if it gets really dark and the device has a hard time focusing, if you have it turned on, this will illuminate and help you catch focus. Here we have our little adjustment knob on the top. This is for any of your power zoom lenses, or if you just choose to use clear image zoom, this is where you do that. Of course, we have our shutter button. This can be programmed to start recording, or how I have it, which is basically just to leave it on photos only. Then we have a couple of customizable buttons up here. We have our joystick on the top and our record button, which, as you'll see a bit later, will actually light up as a tally light, which is really nice. Also on the front, it's a little bit hard to see, but we have a tally light up here above the Alpha logo. We have a couple of 1/4 mounting screws here and here. This is for the top handle that comes with the device. We also have our hot shoe mount right here, which has the protector on it. Again, as with all of the protectors, you want to make sure that you don't lose this, so that way you keep your device pristine. Turning it around to the side here, we have our door for the SD cards and or CF Express slots. So there's two. Each of these is capable of using a CF Express Type A, so if you have one of those, you'll get the best performance with that. In here I have two SD cards. I have a V90 for slot 1 and a V60 for slot 2. Since I don't necessarily always record simultaneously, I like to have the fast card for video on the top and the slower card for photos on the bottom. But if you want to do redundant backups while you're recording in camera, that's an option for you. So moving around back here, we have the back dial, which all of these buttons are pretty much customizable except for the menu and mode buttons. So if you don't like the original functions, you can of course change them, and we'll go into that a little bit later. Also of note is this little middle bar here. This is another tally light, so really exciting to have so many tally lights on this. It's very clear when you start recording, when you stop. And then right here we have our power slider. So to the right is off, to the left is on. And then finally, making our way to the left side of the device, we have a couple of doors here. So we have, of course, a full-size HDMI, which is capable of doing raw output at 4K 60 FPS, so that's a really great thing to have. We also have our mic slot, so that's a TRS cable. We also have headphones, so you can monitor your audio, and we have a USB-C for computer tethering or transferring your files, or even charging. This does support PD, so that's really great to have. And then we also have a micro USB, which can also be used for tethering or other things like that, but it's going to be at a slower speed, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend using that. And we also see here very clearly on this side all of the venting. This does have a fan built in, so when you're recording at high frame rate 4K, it'll keep nice and cool. I've never had this thing overheat, so that is definitely a really positive thing. Another thing that I forgot to mention on the front here is this little dial here. This is your aperture wheel, although you can change it to do other functions if you choose. And then on the bottom, we have, of course, our battery door. So you can just use the battery that came with it. It's going to be an NPFZ battery. pretty much the standard that Sony's been using in recent years. So this is what it looks like, the NPFC 100. And to put the battery back in, there's this little blue detent. You just want to slide it with your battery, and now just push in until it clicks into place. Make sure that it's aligned properly, all of that good stuff. And then to close the door, you just close it, push this button down, it'll lock it in place. So on the bottom, we are going to have a 1/4-20 slot for mounting accessories like this cage here. We also have a 1/4-20 on the left side, right there, and a 1/4-20 around on the right side here. So that is all of the exterior stuff on the Sony FX3. Taking a look now at the top handle that comes with it, here is what it looks like. You have two XLR inputs, input 1 and input 2. These nice routing cable management clips down here, so if you are using one of the Sony mics or something like that that has a thinner XLR cable, you can just snap those right in there. It'll keep your cables nice and tidy. Down at the bottom here we have a little door with a micro USB. I'm not exactly sure what you'd want to use that for, but it's there for connectivity. You also have a little door here which holds our input 3, which is another TRS cable. So this will override the TRS cable from your camera if you're using the top handle. Around back, in here we have our input selectors, so we can choose input 3, input 1 and 2, input 1, channel 1 and 2. So basically, if you want to record input 1 and have a safety channel, you'd go all the way down to the bottom. If you want to record input 1 and 2 simultaneously on separate tracks, you would choose the middle option. And then if you want to have just input 3, you can choose the top option. This also does support 4-channel recording. So if you do want to have, say, your input 1 recording to one channel and then have a safety channel, and you also want to record input 3, you can do that, but you'll have to go into the camera settings. So I'll show you guys that. On the left side of this, we have handle audio. So you want to put this to on if you're going to be using the handle audio. If you're not, and you just want to use this as a handle for getting low shots or having more stability, you can then just push this to the back and that'll turn it off. Especially if you're using phantom power for your microphones, it'll be really important to keep this off if you're not using it. So here we have our attenuation, which is a basically mic cut. So you have 0 dB, which means that there's no reduction. If you have it on 10 dB, that means 10 dB of gain reduction, and then all the way at the bottom is 20 dB of gain reduction. You have that for each of the XLR inputs. And then we have a couple of options for our inputs as well. So you have line, mic, and mic plus 48 volt phantom power. So in my case, I use the Sony ECM XM1, which is a XLR mic that needs phantom power. So I always leave it down at the bottom. But if you're using a mic that doesn't have that, then you can just leave it to mic. And if you're going to be recording out of, say, a mixer or something like that, you want to make sure that you leave it on line, since the difference in gain is going to be significant. And then here we have auto or manual. So if you set it to manual, then this dial controls your gain. Pretty self-explanatory. If you set it to auto, it'll just do that automatically. With input 2, you can also link the two together. So say that you're receiving the same signal and you're just putting it in as a left and right channel, you can link the two together since it would be the same level. Then here we have a low cut. So you can do low cut for input 1 or low cut for input 2. You have off, 100 hertz or 300 hertz. So those are your options there. And then for input 3, you can either set it to auto level or manual level. And again, you have the dial. The other thing that's nice is that if you have all of your switches set and you just need to adjust your gains, even with the door closed, you can still adjust the gain up and down. So really a lot of nice attention to detail here. And finally, as far as our clip here, this is a really nice clip, just opens up like that. And we can open this up. This does require a fairly thick microphone to be able to fit. If you don't have a microphone that'll fit exactly properly, you can get third-party manufactured extenders that'll basically make your microphone a little bit thicker so that way it'll fit in here comfortably. All right, so now I wanted to show you guys how we're going to mount up all of the things to make this a fully functional camera. So starting off with the top handle, it's very simple. You're just going to take the hot shoe protector, pull it off, set it to the side and make sure that it's in a place where you're not going to lose it. And then you just take the hot shoe protector off of the top handle, and then you just want to make sure that the microphone is pointed away from you. Then just kind of wiggle it into place. You want to be careful not to damage anything. It can be a little bit of a pain to get this on, especially if you're behind the camera like I am. So you just want to push it all the way in, and then you just want to push down on these little secure screws and tighten them up. You can also use a screwdriver or something like that if you want to get them really nice and secure, but I'm not going to do that right now. It's not really necessary, but that is the top handle installed, so you can easily grab it. SmallRig does sell some really nice extenders for this top handle since it is a little bit short. For me, I can comfortably hold it, but it's not necessarily the easiest thing to grab if you don't hold it just like this. So if you do want to get extenders, I'll leave links in my description so that we can pick those up, or anything else, of course, that I discuss in this video. All right, so here we are right now. We have the Sony 200 to 600 mounted up here, and the Atomos Ninja 5, which we're going to be using to record the screen. And here, of course, we have the FX3. So all you're going to need to do to mount up your first lens is take off the protector here. So you're just going to twist counterclockwise, and you see that there's a little indent here. You just want to make sure that you line this indent, which is white on the actual sensor, up with the white part on the lens, and then you're just going to twist clockwise until it comes into place. You want to make sure that you do this relatively quickly so that way you don't get any dust or anything like that. And twist into place. Now we're all locked in and ready to go. Alright, so right here we're on the Sony FX3. We have a fresh install, so we're just going to choose all of our settings here. We're going to go with English. Right here, this may not come up for you if you are just getting this camera brand new, but since I've already set this up and I have it on firmware 3.0, I can actually just use the Creator Connect app with my phone, and then that'll automatically set up all of the settings like date and time. But if you don't have that, don't worry. It's pretty simple to just enter all of these things manually. But since I do have this ability, I'm just going to take my phone, connect to it, and we'll get on with the setup. All right, so here we can see on the Creator app on our phone, we have ILME FX3. That's what we're going to need to do. So we'll just tap on that. And you can see that our screen changed on the FX3. All we need to do is just tap OK. And then on our phone, we'll just hit pair. And now it says that we've connected our iPhone to the camera, so we're all good. And now we can just go to the initial camera settings, and here we can just set the date and time and all of that stuff. You want to make sure that you set your auto power off temperature to high. Even though this does have a fan, I recommend leaving it on high, so that way if you do end up using this for a really long time and it does get hot, it doesn't ever shut off on you. But we're just going to say use above settings. And now we are into the camera. Take our SD card. In this case, it's going to be a SanDisk Pro V90 256 gig card. And we're going to insert it into the slot 1. And now you'll see that up in the top right corner, we no longer have a blinking number 1. We now have number 1 with the arrow icon showing that we're going to be able to write to that card. And in the current configuration, we'll be able to get 9 hours and 8 minutes of recording out of it. So now here we're just going to go into the menu, just press the menu button, of course, on your camera. All right, so here we are on the FX3. If you just press the main menu button here, we'll get to the menu. If you press the mode button, you'll get to all of your modes. So here for photos, we have manual, shutter, aperture, program auto, intelligent auto, and then we have our memory recall settings, so MR3, 2, 1. We also have S&Q mode for slow and quick motion. This doesn't record audio, so it's not going to be exactly the best for every situation, but if you don't care about audio and you want to have slow motion, this is what you're going to want to use. And we'll just go back into movie mode for this demonstration. Unfortunately, I kind of made a bit of a mistake and I didn't record initially here on my external recorder, so we're just going to go through all of this stuff. It's not going to be exactly the same as when you get yours, but I'll just walk you through all of the basic things that you need to know to get started. So going into the menu, we'll go to our main menu settings. I like to record in XAVC HS 4K. This is going to be H.265, Apple's high efficiency video codec. If you have a really powerful computer, this will be able to be edited pretty easily. If you don't, though, I would recommend probably going with XAVC S 4K. That's going to be a little bit more of a compatible codec, but it's going to be a little bit less compressed, a little bit lower quality, and it's also going to be a little bit bigger file sizes. But moving down here, you can also record all intros, so that just means that it's going to record all of the frames. There's not going to be very much compression at all. These are going to be larger file sizes, so you're definitely going to want to make sure that you have a very fast SD card, something like a CF Express card or a V90 card to do that. And then here, if we go down to XAVCSI DCI 4K, this is going to be able to record the full sensor readout pretty much of your device, and you're going to be able to shoot in 4K true 24 FPS. But we're just going to leave this in HS 4K. That's what I like to shoot at. Then we're going to go here to record settings. I like to leave this on the maximum, 100 megabits per second. You're also going to have 422 10-bit color. This is absolutely the best way to experience this device. Then for display LUT, turn that on. If we go down here, log shooting setting is going to be off originally, so I like to turn this to Cine EI. Cine EI is nice because it just switches between your two base ISOs, which are 800 and 12,800, to give you the cleanest results overall. You can use different settings if you want, but I like this personally. And then here for color gamut, choose sgamut3.cine/slog3. This is going to give you the best and most flexibility in post for color grading and all of that stuff. You can also embed the LUT file if you want. It's not going to actually write it. If you take the video off of the SD card and put it into your computer, it's still going to look like log footage, but it'll just have that in the metadata. So you can leave that on and it's fine. So here you can format your SD card if you want, but I'm not going to since I have information there. Here we can choose where we want to record the media to. I have it set to slot 1, but you can also do simultaneous recording if you want. That's going to be really important if you're like a wedding videographer or something like that, and you don't want to have any chance of losing your data. Here we can go into file settings, file number, leave it on series. That'll basically just update the count number. You can set the counter reset here. So here we can just reset the counter. We can also go to our file name format. You can do title plus date, standard, title, cam ID, and real number. You can set the cam ID, real number, all of that stuff there. And then here, if we want to rename, we can just go here. This is going to be a pretty archaic menu system, sort of like back in the day with old flip phones. You just press the icon that you want a bunch of times until you get the desired input. And so here we have FX3, so we're good. All right, so here, steady shot, if your lens supports it, leave it on active. For focus mode, I have it on AFC. That's just going to be continuous autofocus. Definitely going to give the best results, so leave it on that. Focus area, you can leave it on wide. Sony's autofocus is generally really good, but if you do need to fine tune it a bit, you can use a smaller size like zone or spot or anything like that if it's having a bit of a difficult time capturing what you want. For face and eye recognition, leave that on. And then we have human detect, but if you want to do animal, you can also set it there. And for frame rate, you can choose between 23.98, 119.88, and 59.94. For our purposes here, we're just going to set up a profile with 23.98, and for the 180-degree shutter roll, we'll do 1/48. Unfortunately, this doesn't have shutter angle, but the calculation's not too hard, and since we can save these to memory recall, it's fine. All right, so those are pretty much all of the features that we want to go over there. Now moving into the menu, we'll get a little bit more detailed. So here we can set up our S&Q. So you can set your frame rate. This is going to be your playback frame rate. So you can do 23.98, record at a frame rate of 120 FPS, and that'll give you 5 times slow motion. You can also choose the recording settings. Again, I like to leave it on the maximum so that way we get the best quality. But again, I don't really use S&Q because it doesn't record audio and it bakes in the slow motion. So I like to have more control, so I just leave mine as picture profiles. That way I can go and do 120 FPS or 60 at my will and have audio recorded alongside that. Proxy settings, if you want to do that, you can. I don't do anything with proxy, so we're just going to move along. For the lens compensation, there's a couple of settings here that we can change. For certain lenses, breathing compensation will be available. Not with this one. This is a 200 to 600 lens, so this doesn't have breathing compensation allowed, but if you're using something like a 24 to 105 by Sony, you can use breathing compensation. Here is where we format our media. So I'm not going to do that right now, but if you want to reset your card, you can do that. Record media settings, you can choose where you want to record things to. I like to have my photos recorded to slot 2 and my video recorded to slot 1, but you can also do simultaneous recording, and you can also do auto switch. If you only want to record to one SD card at a time, it'll automatically switch over to the next one when you fill up the first one. That is pretty much that. You can also write your serial number to the file if you want in the metadata. I don't do that, but if you want to, you can. So here, if we want to save our memory recall settings, you can do that here. You can just select 1, 2, or 3, and those will correspond to M1, M2, or M3, but I'm not going to do that right now. And then you can also choose where your memory recall settings are saved. For me, it's going to be slot 1. You can go here to silent mode settings. So silent mode is going to basically allow you to use the electronic shutter for taking photos and other things like that. Do that if you don't want to disturb anybody, but the mechanical shutter is definitely going to give you the best results overall, so I'd leave it on that. So here, if you are having any issues with your sensor, if there's artifacts or anything like that, you can do auto pixel mapping. That'll get rid of those issues for you. And release without lens, this is going to be enabled by default. I set this to disable since you're generally not going to want to record or take photos without a lens attached. But if you, for some reason, do want that, you can set this to enable. So audio recording, I have the XLR handle on right now, so some of these settings are not going to be available to us. But one thing that I want to make clear to you guys is that you want to keep the wind noise reduction on off when you're recording, since generally speaking, the processing and audio from the FX3 is not going to be as good as an external recorder. You want to make sure that you have as little processing going on here as possible. Here, if you want to do your 4-channel audio recording, you can do that here. So you can do 48 kilohertz and 24-bit 4-channel. So that'll basically just separate all of the things out into 4 channels for you. So if you're doing recording from input 3 and input 1 with a safety channel on 1, that's pretty much where you go to do that. Here you have time code. If you need time code, look up another video. I'm not going to go over that right now since I don't really use time code myself. Here, image stabilization, steady shot, like to leave that on active and leave it on auto for the adjustment. For zoom range, you can set this to either optical only, or you can do it cleared image zoom. I highly would not recommend using digital zoom since it's going to be reducing your quality of your image, but clear image zoom will keep the quality pretty much exactly the same, so I like to leave it on that. If you do have a power zoom lens though, feel free to leave it on optical only, and then you can just change your speed for zooming in and out if you want. Here I like to leave grid display on so that way I see my rule of thirds. You can also change this to be square grid or diagonal and square grid, so whatever you want there. Emphasize record display, that's going to be on by default. I like to leave it off since there's enough tally lights here for me to clearly see when I'm recording and when I'm not. Marker display, you can change all of these things if you want to have markers on your screen. Generally, I leave those off though. Here we have exposure stuff, exposure compensation. If you're in auto mode, you can do exposure compensation and change that up or down. Since we're in Cine EI, we're not going to be really messing with that. If you buy this camera, you're probably going to be a professional anyway, or at least know how to use cameras. But if you don't and you're just getting started, don't feel bad about having this camera. This is an amazing camera to work with, and if you do need to be in auto for some reason, even pros use auto from time to time, so don't feel bad about that. For metering mode, this is going to be basically telling the camera where you want it to pay attention to for giving you an exposure readout. I like to leave it on multi, and then just use false color on an external monitor or something like that. If you want to do auto exposure and you want to expose for a certain part of your frame, you can just set this to a point or something like that, so that way it adjusts based on that particular spot rather than the entire frame. So white balance, if you're going to be using auto white balance for any reason, generally speaking, you're probably not going to want to, but if you do, definitely make sure that you set the shockless white balance to slow, as this will make it a lot harder for people to notice the change in white balance. If you leave it on fast, it'll be pretty jarring and it might ruin your shots. So definitely leave it there. Here we can do a LUT selection, so by default we have S709. That's going to be a nice Rec 709 conversion for your S-Log3, so that we get a very clear image of what your footage is going to look like when you export it. If you want to add your own LUTs, you can go here to Manage User LUTs, import and edit. I have one right here which is false color, so you can just import that and set it to one of the memories. Zebra display, so zebras basically just show you parts of the image that are at a certain exposure level. If you want to use those, by default the camera has a setting right here on the left for zebras. If we go in here to autofocus and manual focus settings, again, autofocus mode, I like to leave it continuous since it'll basically just continuously update and analyze your scene for a new subject. You can change the transition speed if you want to have a fast transition for autofocus, like snapping to one subject or another. You can have that on a higher setting. If you want to have it a little bit slower, you can set it to a lower setting. If it's locked onto a subject and then you want to have it not switch easily to another subject, like say if you're at a wedding and you have it locked onto the bride's face and then somebody else comes into the frame, you want to set this lower so that way it's harder for the camera to lose focus on her. Additionally, you can also set her face as a recognized face and then have that set as the priority. Autofocus assist, you can leave this on or off. If you have it on, you can use the manual focus ring to help the autofocus a little bit without having to switch it fully into manual focus if you want. We also have a focus area, so I like to leave it on wide. Sony's autofocus is generally really good, but if it's having a little bit of trouble latching onto something, this can be particularly an issue if you're doing wildlife videography. You might want to set this to a spot and then use the joystick to choose where you want it. You can also set your focus area color. I like to have it as red, or you can do white. Doesn't really matter so much, but for the focus magnifier and peaking display, I like to have this on red, since the peaking display being red is very clear to see. If you have it on white, it can be generally pretty hard since there's potentially going to be reflections and other things like that. The white just sort of gets lost. Red is really, really good for being able to see your focus peaking. Going back here, we like to have face and eye autofocus. If we go down here, you can have it set either the left or right eye as the priority. I like to leave it on auto, but if you are doing a professional shoot where you really want to be locked in on somebody's left eye or right eye, if it's really well choreographed, that's where you go to change those settings. We can go here to the face and iframe display. I like to leave this on so we see a little box around the person's eye, letting you know exactly what the camera's thinking as far as autofocus. And then you can also do registered faces priority. So if you leave that on, if you take a picture of somebody's face, it'll automatically recognize it in the frame and then do its best to keep the focus on them. All right, so now we're moving on here to playback target. So what's nice is that if, let's say that you're doing recording and you go and switch and take a couple of photos, and then you go review your media from your recording, and you're using different slots for those two. If you press this button down here, it's going to switch to your most recently used SD card. So if you need to switch back to another one, you can just go here, set playback media, and choose slot 1 or slot 2. For magnification, these are basically just settings related to actually looking at your footage that you've captured. So you can do culling or anything like that in here by doing ratings. You can set a custom key for that. You can do viewing options. None of this is really particularly important. Here for smartphone connection, you can connect to your smartphone. This is really great if you're going to want to use your Creators app for doing self-portraits or for transferring files like photos really quickly in full settings. So that's pretty nice. You can also do remote shoot settings. So if you want to have a remote control shooting, that's where you'd go for that. So here, these are all of your connections settings. So you can do Bluetooth remote control. This is really useful if you're going to be using like a DJI RS3 Pro or something. You're definitely going to want to set this to on, so that way your Bluetooth settings can go ahead and start and stop recording so that we don't have to press the camera itself. You can also change the frequency band for your Wi-Fi. You can do 2.4 or 5 gigahertz. Bluetooth functions, so you have pairing. You can manage the paired devices. Basically all of your normal stuff, airplane mode. So that's pretty much that. If we go down here to our little toolbox, this will give us additional settings, so you can set your date and time, NTSC or PAL. So if you're in the US, you're going to be NTSC standard. If you're in Australia or somewhere else, PAL is probably going to be what you want to choose. Here is where you go to reset the settings. So you can go here and reset. And here is where you can load your settings. I have settings right here, so you can see that's my profile. I'm not going to load it right now, but that's where you go for that. Here is one of the best features and the best places for you to go is into customized dial settings. So you can do custom dial settings for photo and video. In this case, you can have it set to follow everything that is in video for photos, or you can set it up different. In here for the video settings, you can go here and change what all of the buttons do. So here on the back, you'll see that we have a bunch of buttons. You can customize pretty much any of these. So by default, button number 1, which is right here, is going to be your focus magnifier. That's labeled 5. If we go down here to the trash can, this doesn't have a setting. Personally, for me, I like to set this as manual focus. So if you want to change anything, just select what you want to change, and then you can go through all of these menus and figure out what you want. So here I like to do AF/MF selector toggle. If you want to change the center button when you're in your actual recording, you can change that. I like to leave this as a menu opener. So we'll say display my menu. You can also go here and change what the left, right, up and down do. So left by default is zebra display, right is peaking display, down is going to be your manual or auto aperture. I don't really like that so much, so I leave it as a picture profile selection for LUTs. So that way I can change my LUT to one of the custom ones, or just leave it on the S7-9. On the top, we have a whole bunch of buttons as well. For the top one, you have press for AV, auto, or manual. Since we're in Cine EI, this is not really useful, so you can change this to whatever you want. Some people like to leave it as opening up the main menu. If we go here to white balance, that's going to be your button labeled WB. I like to leave that alone. For here, if you have it in Cine EI, this is not really going to be useful, so I like to have it as my base ISO switch. This is going to allow me to quickly switch between 800 and 12,800, so that's what I do. For focus standard here, that's going to be your thumbstick. You can leave that alone, or you can change it to something else if you want. And then movie shooting, that's your big red rec button. Generally, you're not going to want to change that. On the front, there's going to be another record button. I like to leave that as movie recording as well. Here for your lens, if you have a button on it, you can set this to focus hold by default, or you can change it to something else. And then you can change what the dials and wheels do. So the front dial by default is going to be your aperture, so I like to leave that alone. The back one, which is right up here, is your ISO. So again, I like to leave that alone. And then here you have another one for controlling your shutter speed. I would highly suggest changing this because if you are a professional, you're not going to want to change your shutter speed while you're recording. I like to leave this on white balance, so that way I can very quickly change what my Kelvin is. If you are prone to hitting this accidentally though, that might not be a good idea and you might just want to set it as not set. But those are my settings for that. You can also change your key settings for playback mode if you want here. And you can also add things to the little function menu. So this is pretty nice if you want really quick settings. So that is there for you. You can also change different settings between stills and movies if you want. So if you want to have, say, your picture profile saved for movies and for videos, you can change that here. So you can say that you want to have, say, your aperture or your shutter speed be different. You can select that. So then we can say display settings. You can toggle what display settings are on. So when you press the display button, you can see different views, or you can leave it on just one view. I like to have all of them and just toggle between them when I need to. Rec with shutter, this means that if you press the shutter button all the way on the front, it'll start recording. I like to leave that on off, but if you want to have that option, you can leave that on. Alright, so here you have the dial settings. So these could be accessed again as we did before, so not going to go through that too much. My dial settings, you can change these. So these are sort of special secondary functions that you can set to all of the dials. I don't really mess with that too much, but if you want to add even more functionality, you can. So for touch operation, leave that on. Generally speaking, touch screens are nice. So you can do touch sensitivity and keep it on standard. Swipe up by default is open in the function menu, so if you just swipe up, it'll bring up all of the functions. I like that. Monitor brightness, if you're outside, definitely set this to sunny weather. The display doesn't get super bright, but it'll be a lot easier to see regardless. Inside, I like to leave it on manual and just keep it right in the center. Saves on battery a little bit. Display quality, put that up to high. It'll use a little bit more battery life, but it's definitely worth it. Monitor flip direction, leave that on auto. That just means that when you flip the monitor around, it'll automatically make it look appropriate for you. So then here for display options, I don't really change any of this stuff, but if you want to, you can. Auto power off temperature, this we set when we first set up the device, but if you had it on standard and you want to change it, that's where you go. Moving down again, volume settings, you can change the volume of the internal recording. So that is there for you. 4-channel audio monitoring. If you want to plug in headphones and you want to monitor channels 1 and 2, you can do 1 and 2. If you want to monitor 3 and 4, you can change there. Or you can do left channel being 1 and 3 and right channel being 2 and 4. So there's a lot of settings there for monitoring. Audio signals, this is going to make beeps and blings and other things like that. I like to leave this off usually, just so that way I'm not disturbing people. But if you don't care about that, you can leave it on. USB connection mode, I like to leave it on select when connect since I use a bunch of different devices. Some of them may need control and some of them may just be for file transfers. So if you just use one type of device though, you can change it to MSC for transfers, but I like to leave that on select when connect. USB power supply, leave that on. That allows you to use an external battery to power your device. HDMI resolution, these are all of the settings that you're going to need if you're using a monitor. HDMI output settings, you can change all of this. This is where you go to change RAW. I'm not going to do it right now since it would kind of mess up my recording, but you can do that. You can also do timecode output, 4-channel audio output, all of those good things are found in there. And here, if you want to do control for HDMI, this basically means that if you press the record button on here, it'll record on the HDMI device. So moving on, we're pretty much at the end here. So video light mode, you can do power link, rec lamp. This is all of the tally lights. I like to leave all of them on so that way the red record button, this backlight here, and the one on the front all light up red. Really easy to see exactly what's going on. Fan control, I like to leave that on auto, but you can leave it on minimum, off and record, or always off. Auto is my recommendation, so that way you'd never overheat your camera, but there may be situations where you'd want to leave it on off. Sensor cleaning, do this if your sensor has dust on it. You can look up videos about how to do that. Auto pixel mapping, leave this on. This sets whether or not to optimize the image sensor automatically. It'll basically just do a little quick setup when you turn the camera on. If you want to do manual pixel mapping though, you can do that right here. It's going to reboot the device, so we're not going to do that. And then here, all the way at the bottom, version, you can see that we're on version 3.0. And you can see that our lens is on version 2. So this is the current version for the FX3. If you're on a previous version, you'll just need to go to Sony's website, download the profile to your camera, and then do the software update. And so those are pretty much all of the settings. If you want to do any My Menu settings, you can set those up. I'll just show you really quickly how I have my My Menu set up. So remember that I said that we can go down here and we can load settings. I'll just load up my previous profile. And in my previous profile, I don't have HDMI info display on, but we're just going to turn that on for demonstration purposes. So here we go. Now you can see my screen again. And now you'll see that this is pretty much fully populated. So the way that I like to set this up is have all of my HDMI settings on the top, since I like to use external monitors and have fast access to all of that stuff. And I also have other nice things like lens compensation. So we have shading comp, chromatic aberration compensation, distortion compensation. So very quick access to all of those things. My zebra levels, LUTs. Down here, these are settings for photos. So I like to have my image quality settings set to RAW with a 4:3 aspect ratio, continuous shooting drive mode. I also like to have bracket settings and interval shoot functions, so that way if I want to do a time lapse, so if I want to do exposure bracketing or anything like that, I can do that right here. Long exposure noise reduction, I keep that off. For the shutter type, I like to keep that on mechanical, since it'll give me the best quality and there'll be no rolling shutter. Silent mode settings, I have that on my next page. Audio recording, so all of the audio stuff I have right here. Wind noise reduction, I keep that on off. For the grid line display, again, rule of thirds. Here's all of my external connection functions. So that's the way that I like to set my menu up. You can set yours up differently if you want. And then right here, you'll see that if I go here to MR1, you'll see that we're at 4K 24 FPS, and it's going to be 1/48 shutter speed. So that is that. But if you go and change to memory recall 2, this is going to be our 59.94 shutter speed or frame rate and 1/125 shutter speed. So again, 180-degree roll there. And again, if we go to MR3, this is going to be our 120 FPS super slow motion 4K. So that's going to be 120 FPS with 1/250 for our shutter speed. So that's how I set all of my stuff up, and that is the full setup guide for the Sony FX3. So if you guys enjoyed this video and liked all of the effort that I put into it, please make sure that you drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe for more content, and I will see you guys in the next video.